Доброго
Good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen. My name is Volodymyr Sheiko. I'm director of the Ukrainian Institute. I'm happy to welcome all of you here at this event dedicated to the global rating, global soft power index, and the place of Ukraine therein. And we hold this event together with the Minister of Foreign Affairs and with the support of the UCMC and our British colleagues. And I'm going to switch to another language because we are going to hold this in English, but you can listen to Ukrainian translation in a separate stream available at the website of UCMC. MFA, and please pay attention that we are talking about two separate streams.
This is the presentation that we are organizing together with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Brand Finance, and the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center about the Global Soft Power Index and Ukraine's place in this year's ranking of countries ranked by their soft power potential that is being that has been commissioned and implemented by Brand Finance. It's a brand valuation consultancy from the UK that has been conducting research on perceptions of nation brands for quite many years. And in 2020, they also established and launched the Global Soft Power Index. And this is basically the second year of this global research that was, by the way, extended to a couple of dozen new countries this year. So during this presentation, we will discuss the importance of soft power for nations, what is soft power, and what role soft power can play in international perceptions of a country and its international relations. We will discuss key insights from the Global Soft Power Index 2021. We also will discuss the impact the COVID-19 pandemic has had on nations around the globe and their position in this year's ranking. We will have an overview of Ukraine's performance and the difference from the past year's results, and we'll discuss some recommendations, outcomes, advice, actions that Ukraine as a country, as a nation, may want to take to further improve its results in this index. So, as I said, in Ukrainian, this presentation is available in two languages, in Ukrainian and English. So, if you want to listen to it in Ukrainian, you can switch to another live stream that is available on the Ukrainian Institute's Facebook page, but also on the Foreign Ministry's and the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center's Facebook pages. It is my pleasure to introduce our great speakers, presenters, and discussants today. We're particularly happy to have Minister for Foreign Affairs Dmytro Kuleba with us today, who will introduce his basically history of promoting Ukraine's soft power internationally at the Foreign Ministry and in his work as a diplomat. We have online Steve Thomson, Inside Director from Brand Finance from the UK, and Parul Soni, Associate at Brand Finance, who will present basically the index, the methodology, global rankings of countries, some dynamics and lessons learned from this year's index, but also will have a particular focus on Ukraine. We also have two discussants who will share their professional perspectives on what we're going to hear today and possibly devise some recommendations for Ukrainian soft power for the years to come. So we have Kateryna Zarembo, who is Associate Fellow at the New Europe Center, one of the leading analytical centers that has done a great deal of work analyzing Ukrainian foreign policy and devising practical recommendations for it. And we have Alina Frolova, strategic advisor, founder at StratCom Ukraine, who comes from, I think, both soft power and hard power backgrounds. So your insight on the correlation between the two will be particularly valuable for the purpose of this discussion. And my name is Volodymyr Sheiko. I am director of the Ukrainian Institute, Ukraine's public organization for cultural diplomacy, affiliated to the Foreign Ministry of Ukraine. So I will stop here, and I will pass the mic to Minister Dmytro Kuleba for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Volodymyr. I'm pleased to participate in this session despite all the conditions caused by pandemic, which we all suffer from. It's still important to continue our lives, to go on with our projects, and to change the world for the good, for the better. Soft power. 2020 and the beginning of 2021 is a very special time for soft power. Needless to say that pandemic became both a challenge and an opportunity for countries to use this phenomena or this time for projecting their soft power abroad. As we speak, probably one of the biggest soft power struggles that is unfolding in front of our eyes is called vaccine diplomacy. And the impact of the vaccine diplomacy on real life is far stronger than the impact of hard power or military powers which exist and compete globally. There are many nuances about soft power and specifically the soft power in terms of pandemic. I'm absolutely certain that excellent participants of these discussions will highlight all of them and will discuss them. What I would like to mention is that in the Foreign Ministry of Ukraine, we consider the projecting of soft power of Ukraine as a fundamentally important function of Ukraine's diplomacy. No country can be successful, attractive, without strong soft power that it is capable to project in the countries which are of particular interest to it. Some countries have sufficient muscles and power to project themselves globally and pursue their soft power interests in all corners of the world. Some have to adopt a more tailored approach. Ukraine belongs to the latter, to the second group. We've been working hard to build capacity in the realm of soft power through some years. Of course, the year of 2014 was a real life-turning moment for many, because it showed that to protect your country from foreign military aggression, you have to be strong in hard power, but you have to be equally strong in your soft power. And this was also the moment when it became clear to the statesmen and to main stakeholders that soft power is absolutely essential and indispensable for the prevention of conflicts, not only for the resolution of conflicts. We in the Foreign Ministry will adopt a public diplomacy strategy. This will happen in the coming days. And this public diplomacy strategy will become an instrument to consolidate soft power efforts and undertakings necessary to improve Ukraine's reputation globally and to further strengthen our positions in the world. I'm pleased, of course, to see Ukraine's progress in the Soft Power Index 2021 when it comes to a number of indicators such as business trade policy and future growth potential. The index also demonstrates a high potential for Ukraine in when it comes to history and cultural heritage. I have only one problem with these improvements, is that I hate the word potential. I heard the word potential for too many years applied to Ukraine, and we should finally switch from speaking about potential to actually realized potential. So not what we may have in the future, but what we already have here and now as a success. And to achieve that, of course, no foreign ministry will suffice. You need a very synergetic effort of many agencies, government agencies, and civil society experts, businesses. Soft power is something that is not being born in one specific place. It's like a river that gets to the full strength, that receives its full strength in beauty from many small rivers and sources pouring into its mainstream. So this is how I would describe soft power, and to this end, we cooperate closely with other agencies, in particular with Ministry of Culture, Economy, Tourist Agency, and many other bodies, to ensure that we all work in a synergetic way. Many believe that pandemic is an obstacle. I see opportunities because one of the main advantages that we lost because of pandemic, or at least it was limited, access to it was limited, is the freedom of movement, the global freedom of movement. However, there are no limitations on the global movement online. And therefore, we in the Foreign Ministry decided to take advantage of the pandemic and give a push to boost the presence of Ukraine online by launching an official website, Ukraine.ua, which is the official online gate to Ukraine. And these kind of efforts, they help to improve access of people around the globe to information about Ukraine. We're undertaking similar efforts to help businesses. And from all these puzzles are put together to form a beautiful picture of Ukraine available for foreigners abroad. There are many things which are taking place, including the great battle for borscht, which Ukraine is winning and will definitely win in the end, and which already results in better better promotion of Ukrainian culinary heritage abroad. So there are many interesting things happening when it comes to the soft power of Ukraine. However, all this will vanish in vain if all these pieces are not put together. If all these rivers and streams do not form a strong, powerful river. And that's what we are working on, because this is the only way to success and to the further improvement of Ukraine's position in the soft power index, which I will be personally not only looking forward to, but also working on. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, for this introduction and appreciation of the role of soft power in actually state policies across the board. And of course, it's not just part of the foreign policy drive, but has a lot of this process has indeed a lot of stakeholders in the government, in the civil society. Before we move on to the presentation, I want to ask you a question about appreciation of soft power in other government bodies and in the public service. So, just a brief intro, since the introduction of the very term soft power in early 1990s by Joseph Nye, there has been a lot of discussions around the usefulness of this term, about the very concept of soft power. Is it applicable? Is it useful? Is it relevant for today's world? And concerns have been raised about it's the interaction between soft and hard power, between viability of this concept, between its usefulness, and whether soft power can be coercive or manipulative, and various misuses that can be applied to this concept internationally, and as we can see by our immediate neighbors as well. But you'd sort of touched base on its clear advantages, particularly in the times of global crisis. So vaccine diplomacy and international solidarity and international aid in times of crisis can play indeed a vital role in strengthening a nation's soft power, and it's clearly visible in this year's index because it takes account of actions nations have taken to battle the COVID-19 pandemic. And as we see from the case of New Zealand, it helped this country really go up significantly in this year's rating. But also, you mentioned the times of war and times of crisis, and the soft power can indeed play a role in preventing this crisis, not just battling them and dealing with the consequences. Is there appreciation of this in different government departments, in different public agencies, that it's not just hard infrastructure and hard assets of Ukraine that can, strengthen its role and agency internationally, but also something that has been overlooked by many, indeed is equally, if not more important than this?
Indeed, appreciation for soft power is widely shared in the government or across the government. This was not the case before 2014. This is why I mentioned this year, the year of the beginning of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, as a turning point for also in the perception of soft power, its impact and its infrastructure, if I may put it, how the infrastructure of the soft power of a specific country should be built. Whatever the term is, and whenever it was officially, the word soft power was officially coined, we all understand that soft power existed always, because countries throughout history projected themselves not only through military or hard power or economic power, but or coercion, but also through some through what we now call soft power. As any instrument available to humankind, soft power can be used for both good and bad purposes. It can be coercive, it can be inspiring, it can be relieving, it can be depressing, and we are witnessing these cases on every corner of our life, especially during the moments of the high struggle. So the essence of soft power depends exclusively on the holder or on the source of that power. If you want to achieve good purposes with that, you have it. The toolkit is in your hands. However, if you have to achieve the opposite, you have the same toolkit at your disposal, and this is the reality of our life. So we have to focus on making sure that, of course, soft power is used for the good of mankind, for the good of our societies and cooperation between countries. But no one can guarantee you that there will not be someone who will find an opposite application for the soft power, for the same soft power. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for these remarks, because they segue us quite nicely into the presentation, and I hope that Steve will actually, have this link, which is indeed a very good point. How soft power in this year's ranking, how soft power potential is actually related to practices of good governance and liberal values that are exercised across the world, and whether countries actually use soft power to, cover some of the less attractive activities that they're doing internationally, and damaging the international order, rather than helping to achieve that solidarity that we've been talking about. So thank you, Minister, for your remarks, and I will hand over to Steve to do the first sort of part of the presentation on the general results, the methodology, the purpose of this index, and also the main results and outcomes. Please, Steve, over to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon to you in Ukraine, and good morning here in London. And thank you very much for your introduction, and also to the Minister for his contribution. In particular, I noted he said no country can be successful unless it manages to harness soft power and strengthen it. So I think that's really for us an endorsement of this whole program and why it's important to countries like Ukraine and indeed every country on the planet. So I will start by talking about our soft power measurement, what it is, why soft power is important and how it can benefit a nation. And I'll talk really more about the results from a global perspective. And then my colleague Parul will really focus more on Ukraine's performance and where there are strengths and where there are some, well, we can say potential, not necessarily everybody's favorite word, but potential for improvement and perhaps imperative for improvement. So Parul, if you can move on to the next slide, I'll just explain very briefly who we are. So we are a brand valuation and strategy consultancy. Originally, our focus was on evaluating commercial brands, of all shapes and sizes around the world. But some 15 or 20 years ago, we started to employ the same kind of approach of evaluating corporate brands to nation brands, and assessing where they are strong and where they are developing and delivering tangible benefits to their citizens, its businesses and other stakeholders. And we started doing formal valuations of those. Then in the last 2 years, we developed this discipline further by launching the Global Soft Power Index. And that is the world's most comprehensive evaluation of the perceptions around the world of different nations. And we do this really so we can help countries, hopefully like Ukraine, to understand how it can communicate its assets and strengths better and develop a strategy really for telling the world about the many great things that you have to offer it. So our next slide, please. So what is soft power? There are many definitions out there, but the one that we have adopted, which is very close really to Joseph Nye's own kind of way of thinking, the father of soft power, we define it as a nation's ability to influence the preferences and behaviors of various actors in the international arena through attraction or persuasion rather than coercion. So if we think of coercion as hard power, military and perhaps pure financial power, then we're looking really at the other qualities a nation possesses to attract people to come and buy its products and services, to visit it, to invest in it, and to embrace its cultures in many different ways. So it's about attraction and persuasion. The methodology, we will only just briefly describe it, but there's more information on our website, and we're happy to take follow-up questions. It's based on the largest survey around the world of nation perceptions. We basically do research among the general public in 102 markets around the world, a very, very wide-ranging survey, and complement that with a separate survey of what we call specialist audiences. And these are experts in fields such as business, in media, in academia, in the public sector, financial analysts, people whose business is to understand the strengths and weaknesses of different nations. So we have two surveys that we blend. And this year's index covers perceptions of 105 different countries. So it's very, very wide-ranging. Ukraine was included in wave one, so we have 2 years of information about Ukraine and many other nations, and we'll be obviously going into these in detail. We have a number of different dimensions that we cover. We have 40 different metrics overall, looking at measures such as overall influence, familiarity with the nation, its reputation, its performance on many different aspects of soft power, such as business and trade, education, culture, and so on and so forth. And for this most recent wave, we also included some detailed perceptions of the response to the COVID crisis, which obviously has dominated our lives for the last year. And for us, we felt was an important measure to bring in for this year's index. Move on, please. So why does this matter? And as the Minister said, really, soft power really is important. It does help a nation prosper and develops socially. There are many studies and many commentators who've shown how strong soft power can deliver benefits to a nation in many ways. Obviously, most tangibly in things such as foreign investment into that country, in terms of attracting tourists to come and visit, in business and trade, increasing the demand for your products and services, maybe harder to quantify, but also improving international partnerships and the influence that a country can have on the world stage, both politically, but also culturally. And in things like talent attraction, both attracting skilled people to come and live and work to Ukraine or other nations, attracting people to come and study there. And also, even if a country in Ukraine is in this category, people have been leaving Ukraine perhaps to go and study elsewhere, to go and work elsewhere and develop their careers, to come back and say, okay, now is the time to come back and apply those skills in your home country. Soft power can help there as well. Sometimes these things are hard to quantify, but there have been studies that have done this. The University of Edinburgh have quantified many of these. Our own preliminary findings suggest that, for example, a 1-point increase in soft power in our index is associated with a significant increase in net foreign investment. So the benefits are proven and are significant. And soft power delivers because this is how brands deliver. And it may seem sort of trite or superficial to compare a nation brand like Ukraine to a brand of laundry detergent or to Coca-Cola, but there are some parallels. The values of strong brands to businesses and nations are well known. They provide a degree of reassurance and trust. They are a kind of mental shortcut that immediately associates a country like Ukraine with good things, with strong and attractive properties. And this is what you want to happen, that as soon as people hear the word Ukraine or things from Ukraine, they're immediately given some reassurance and some mental reminders of the attractiveness that you have. There's a brand kind of pull that says people will seek you out, seek out your products, think about coming to visit if they know good things about you. And in times of trouble, a strong brand provides a degree of resilience that says, okay, if we have some difficulties here and there, these are temporary, these are specific. We still have many things. So the implication here is to think about your brand the same way that corporate brand owners do, nurture it, strengthen it, because the benefits will come. And so, you know, in a difficult, challenging year, a strong brand provides trust and reliability. And in 2020, this was more important than ever. If a country could be seen as, you know, providing a steady hand, dealing with the crisis, good governance, a resilient economy, and strong science and technological assets to deal with this challenge, this was certainly going to be a strong benefit. And this is reflected in the results in our index this year, with the #1 nation leading this year and overtaking the US and UK is Germany. So they rank #1 in our soft power index for 2021. On the back of a very steady performance led by Angela Merkel, of course, but not just from her, but strong performance across the board in how the country has dealt with the COVID crisis, very steady government, strong assets in a field such as education and science can only help, and very good scores in terms of its international relations. Germany is seen as a very good international partner and player. But really, Germany's assets, you know, across the board, a strong performer, and that consistency has led to it being the #1 nation for 2021. If we look at our top 10, what else can we see? Well, we can see Japan, also a steady player, moving up to #2. But the US, which was #1 the previous year, has come down significantly, drops 5 places to 6, and I'll talk about that in a little more. China also falling. Russia, which was in the top 10, has dropped out and been replaced by Australia. But we don't see, you know, it's not like the ranking changes dramatically year on year. I mean, a 5-place drop for the US is quite dramatic. So one of the things that we can see is that nonetheless, you know, strong brands have a degree of resilience and a degree of consistency. And just as in the field of, I don't know, soft drinks, you know, Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola are #1 and 2 and have been for decades. We see this with nation brands, that a strong brand and strong soft power assets will mean that, you know, you will be resilient. Those attractions don't disappear overnight. So even where a country has struggled somewhat, such as the US, it still retains a certain amount of power and attraction. We can also see from the top 10 rankings that, as you'd expect really, many of the nations here are liberal democracies which are attractive and are seen as well-governed, well-educated people, strong cultural assets. And you might say, well, maybe that's all that it is then. We are just measuring countries with a good liberal democracy with a good reputation for being good guys. But that's not necessarily true in the case of a country like China. And it's important to understand that soft power is more than just reputation. There is a degree of power. Clout is an English term that is often used in this sense, that needs to be combined with reputation. And the true soft power champions have both. They have a certain amount of economic power and strong assets that are built on that, but they also have a good reputation. And that's really, to be #1 like Germany, you need to have both. But what about the US? We know that everybody's interested in the US from our own survey. In fact, it ranks #1 for familiarity and in terms of a country that people are interested in. But it had a very, very turbulent year in 2020, and that's reflected in that drop from 1st to 6th that I mentioned. What's driven that in terms of the measures is a perceived decline in influence, quite a significant drop in its reputation. It wasn't in the top 10 before, but it's now dropped out of the top 20. And for a rich nation, its reputation for governance is actually pretty low. And we know that Trump himself has been a really polarizing figure on the world stage. The world has seen things like the Black Lives Matter riots being a challenge. There's been challenges to the way its election has been contested, which the world has noted. But most of all, the world has seen a shockingly poor response to the COVID crisis. This was one of the measures that we introduced. And for the US to be last placed of all on this measure is quite remarkable. 105th place in terms of perceptions of how well the US handled the crisis. And that has in turn affected perceptions of governance and reputation. But look, the US did not fall from first to 105th overall. It only dropped down to the 6th. And we mustn't write off the US. In fact, I think the US will bounce back with the new administration. There are still tremendous assets the US holds. It's still a very attractive place for culture. It still has tremendous technological and scientific assets, and the presence of Pfizer and Moderna in helping to deal with the COVID crisis can only remind people of the US's sheer power and advanced assets in this space. So yes, the US has taken a knock, but it's here to stay in that top 10, and I think it will bounce back. If not to first, I think it will certainly be challenging for the top 3 again in the next wave. But what about, what about Trump? Surely Trump has destroyed the US's reputation. Well, no, because strong brands are very resilient. They don't, even when their governance is questioned, the US is more than just one person. An admired CEO helps, but we see this with brands like Amazon. We, in our other research, look at the reputation of global CEOs, and Jeff Bezos does not rank anywhere near the top 10 in terms of the reputation amongst peers and analysts as being a top CEO. Yet Amazon is the world's second most valuable brand and is a tremendous brand. So it's a reminder that even if the CEO or the president is not seen as doing a good job, that soft power is more than one person, and the nation's assets are more than the who is leading that government. Back to our index, China also saw a dip, dropped 3 places to 8th, and here China's performance is interesting. The reputation that China has is not good. It's in the mid rankings, 56th place. It's mixed. It's not terrible, but it's not great. And there are mixed opinions also around China regarding its governance, how well and I think we are aware of some of the concerns that people have about China's governance. Also a decline year on year in international relations, particularly among our specialists who are not convinced that China is always looking out for the world's interests rather than China's own. So yes, China suffered a drop, but I think if we look at the longer term soft power strategy that China is adopting, I think we can still see success here. It's still in the top 10 for soft power, despite this average reputation. But the reputation is average, and it actually has a good reputation in many parts of the world, parts of the Middle East and Africa and Russia, parts where the Belt and Road Initiative have been particularly vigorous, and where the vaccine diplomacy referred to by the minister is, again, very active. And it has a growing reputation in areas such as education and science. The technological assets of China are now being recognized very widely. So we think China will continue to win friends globally. And we think China's soft power assets, despite this mixed reputation, is considerable. And it's a reminder that soft power is not just about good reputation. It helps for sure, and you can't have it with a really, really bad reputation. But you can have a lot of soft power even if your reputation is a little bit mixed. And another country perhaps with a mixed reputation are your neighbors next door. That's dropped out of the top 10, again with a drop in its reputation, decline in perceptions of governance, and with a particularly skeptical view than about the trust that Russia has, how trustworthy the nation is among the general public. So there is growing skepticism about Russia's reputation, but meantime, it still has a lot of perceived influence and also seen as strong in some areas culturally, its international influence, and in the field of science. Russia still is seen as having quite a bit of power and assets. Moving on quickly, generally, our general public and the specialists agree on reputation, but they don't always agree. And in some ways, where we picked out some exceptions here, we might see signals of where perhaps soft power might be in the ascendancy or in decline. And I think that's possibly true with regard to Russia, but also a country like Saudi Arabia, where the specialists are maybe more aware of the challenges that nation has in diversifying away from oil, and also some concerns about governance. Now, what about the relationship between soft and hard power? Now, if you look at a country like the UK, 150 years ago, this was a country supreme, top in terms of hard power, based on strong military, the conquests it had made in terms of territory and influence. And the first industrializing nation, it was all about hard power for the UK. But now, if we look at where the UK is today, we see it as a strong soft power nation. Yes, strong financial and trade assets and strong industry, particularly in things like financial services, but tremendously strong cultural influence in terms of music, theatre, sport, strong in things like media, and still a very strong scientific and technological assets and education as well. So, the UK is a great example of how soft power can be reinforced and eventually replacing hard power. But it's good to look at the relationships between the two. There's clearly a correlation. It's easier to have soft power if you're a country like China with strong cultural and international and diplomatic influence, but also an increasingly strong economy, able to put behind the Belt and Road Initiative. So for sure, there is a relationship between soft and hard power, but it's not a one-for-one relationship at all. We see countries punching above their weight, not particularly strong hard power, countries such as New Zealand, the Nordic countries, Switzerland, Singapore, country like the UAE as well. These are countries that have considerable soft power, despite modest hard power. And on the other hand, there are countries in the bottom right of our chart, including, I have to say, Ukraine, but also India, Brazil, big countries, big economies, strong diplomatic influence and reach, but don't necessarily have the soft power to accompany that. And yeah, we use the word potential, but we think Ukraine definitely can move up and join some of those nations towards the top. It's not going to happen overnight, but we think you can do it. And Parul will talk about how and why. But we must remember that soft power is really about branding. I mean, branding perception is everything. We have to try and change those perceptions, and it's not easy. We look at the UK. Actually, the food in the UK, you may not think it if you don't live here, but actually the food is pretty good. But the perceptions globally are still very, very mixed about British food. And maybe they've encountered some of this maybe less great cuisine that we have to offer, things like Marmite, terrible pies, strange pizzas. We still have a long way to go to change perceptions about the great food we have. And stereotypes aren't easy to shake off. Germany has many, many admirers around the world. You can see the rankings, top rankings or very high rankings in things like leadership, economy, its diplomatic efforts and trust. But I'm afraid poor Germany, not seen as a great fun place, despite all of that, and it has to overcome some of those stereotypes, despite being widely admired. That's the goal. But it is possible. It's not an overnight thing. But the starting point is to understand the importance of soft power. Only if you understand where there are strengths, where there are challenges, can you then start to deal with this and improve perceptions of Ukraine as a nation and improve perceptions of the brand. Then soft power can be harnessed to the benefit of the nation. And yes, it's not overnight, but by understanding and harnessing soft power, then it's for sure nations like Ukraine can benefit in the way that Singapore, New Zealand, and many others have. So please, we hope you will explore our results. They are available on our full dashboard, but I think we'll take a quick pause, maybe with some questions from you, Volodymyr, but then Parul will talk about Ukraine's results in more detail shortly.
Thanks a lot, Steve. I have probably about 25 questions to you right now after this presentation. Thanks a lot for this very comprehensive overview of what soft power is, what it can do, and what the index can tell us about so many ways our societies function and interact in the world. Before we move on to the second half of your presentation, of Parul's presentation, I have just one question about correlation between soft power and foreign investment. Where, yeah, you mentioned this on one of the slides, and that soft power essentially replaces hard power as a set of most important and key assets a country can have today. I'm asking this because in our work of the Ukrainian Institute, in our work as cultural diplomats, we often get asked this question, and I hate it, and I hate to ask it to you, to pass on this question to you now, but we often have to prove that this work is worth doing, and that cultural diplomacy isn't just something nice, intangible, and a luxury, particularly in today's world, but something that is worth investing in with some long-term returns in mind. And as with any sort of intangible asset, as with any intangible activity, sometimes it's a hard case to defend. So could you elaborate a little bit more about that, about how you think the correlation between soft power and potential of a country, how it can translate into economic benefits? I think it's a very powerful argument for many governments who are willing or not willing to invest in promotion of their soft power. Thanks.
Yes, I'm happy to do so. I think, the starting point is there's a real consensus about this. It's not something that there is really any dispute about. If you look at commentators from many, many different countries, government figures, as well as financial experts, there is a general agreement that the benefits are significant and tangible economically and socially. But if we still have to prove this and demonstrate it with hard evidence, the evidence is there. This is part of our own work, of course, in not just putting these hard values on brands, but then linking the valuations through to commercial performance. That's part of what we do, to show that when a brand improves on a certain measure, that translates to an increase in particular metrics. This could be number of inbound foreign investment. That's a key measure, but it may be inbound tourism. It could be the number of foreign students studying, and so on and so forth. I did make reference also to work done by the University of Edinburgh. This was work that's in the public domain that the British Council actually commissioned, but for an independent assessment, and they looked. Again, it's quite detailed analysis looking at the relationship between soft power measures and things such as FDI, foreign students, tourism, and so on and so forth, and again find very clear evidence that there is a definite a relationship, it's really not open to much doubt. Of course, for something like FDI, FDI is, it's not a perfect relationship. Foreign investment's going to be affected at times by very, very specific kinds of initiatives and discussions. We're not suggesting that it's all about soft power, but there really is very, very clear evidence to show that the benefits are more than just nice to have. Now, of course, it's tricky. But if you think about the decisions that an inbound investor has to make, can we always demonstrate that some of the softer kind of initiatives, the cultural initiatives, are going to play a role? But I think it's quite clear that you can find the linkages that says, okay, if I'm going to invest, build a business in Ukraine, what's going to matter to me? It's not just simply, okay, yeah, those Ukrainians, that's going to be a great market because they're going to buy my product there. That's going to help, but to build a business that perhaps is going to operate on the global or regional stage, we need to understand, okay, what does Ukraine have to offer in the field of, yes, helping establish a business, with being open for business, having great educational, scientific resources. I'm going to get great, talented people to work in my business. I'm going to attract people to come and want to live and build their careers in Ukraine because it's a great place to live and a great lifestyle and an interesting place to be. The place is well governed. So when my people come and try and open a business here and manage it, they're going to find that they're going to be treated properly and fairly, and law is going to be respected. These things I'm sure you all know, but it's very clear that the decision to invest or not is going to take into account all of these factors.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks a lot. I think we'll come back to these points in a Q&A session, because I've already seen some questions from the audience pertaining to this. So Parul, over to you. Please share the outcomes of the index for Ukraine and main findings and recommendations that you can devise based on your research, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. In the next set of slides, I'll be taking you through the results highlights for Ukraine from the latest soft power study. So overall, Ukraine's soft power score has improved from 31.7 to 31.9. So this is highlighting a step in the right direction. However, what we are seeing is that the rank that Ukraine holds has dipped a little bit. And this is partially due to the addition of all of the new countries that we're including in the research this year, expanding it so that there's a greater comparative sample of countries that we're researching. So if you exclude all of those new countries that we've added in, Ukraine's rank would have been 51. While this is a step in the right direction, I think some of these improvements have been dampened by the pandemic. And this has been the case that we're seeing for several other countries within the overall index as well. So if we look at the snapshot performance on the right-hand side of how Ukraine has done on all of the different metrics, I think one of the key challenges that remains for Ukraine this year as well is that there's currently an opportunity for Ukraine to own specific attributes and specific unique positioning that Ukraine can establish and communicate and really own a specific area that people will associate the country with. One of the key KPIs that we track within our research is that of familiarity. And the three comparisons that you see on the screen really demonstrate why it is that Ukraine ranks a bit lower than some of the other countries. So the UK, for example, is our top-ranking nation in terms of familiarity. And you can see that in the results of different audiences around the world. So in a lot of the key large markets around the world, they have very high familiarity with the UK, consistently giving the UK a very high score in terms of how well they know the country, how well they understand it, and how aware they are of what's happening in the Similarly, I've also included a comparison to Israel, for example. Israel is a country with, a population much smaller than Ukraine, only 9 million, but it ranks 25th in terms of overall familiarity. And this is down to Israel being able to establish a lot of familiarity in a lot of different markets around the world. So there's fewer countries that have very low levels of awareness with Israel, and their familiarity is more widespread across the globe, instead of just being focused in amongst countries that are neighboring to it or in the same region. Ukraine, on the other hand, obviously has a lot of familiarity in markets close to it, with close associations like Russia, Poland, etc. But there's still room for Ukraine to build its familiarity amongst some of the key global markets. So as you can see, the US, China, UK, these are all audiences where not a lot of people in these markets actually understand what Ukraine has to offer or even know much about it. And this chart mapping the impact, the correlation between familiarity and influence, demonstrates how familiarity is an important building block for influence. So in order to gain influence, which is on the y-axis that you see, and in order to move up that graph, you have to improve your familiarity along the way. If people don't know you, if people don't know what you have to offer, it's difficult to build relevance and relevance and influence on the world stage. One of the areas that Ukraine has done well on this year is business and trade pillar. We've seen improvements in the business and trade pillar score for Ukraine. We've also seen an improvement in its rank if you exclude any of the new countries that have been introduced this year. So the rank would have improved from 53 to 52. And this is really reflective of the several policy changes and rules that have been implemented over the last year to improve the business environment in the country. The several decrees that have been passed, which were repealed to which have been hampering business development, laws relating to the land market, state support for investors, and also Ukraine's improvement in the ease of doing business rankings, lower inflation, so better economic conditions all around. And in the introduction of policies has been recognized in this measure. One of the other metrics within the business and trade pillar that we look at is future growth potential. Now, this is a metric that we've introduced for the first time this year and is really designed to capture, I know the minister said this is not a word that he's fond of, but it's really designed to capture the future growth potential. And I think this is quite indicative of where the future of soft power might lie and where the future of the balance of power in the world might lie. And as you can see in the top 10 countries, interestingly includes both one of the largest countries in the world, China, as well as one of the smallest, Singapore, both within the same top 10 ranking. So it's really reflective of the fact that it's not necessarily just scale and size and your current standing in the world that has an impact on this metric. Another thing to note is that there are no Western or Central European nations except for Russia, and that really highlights the shift of economic center of gravity, as it's often described, away from the West. Ukraine ranks especially well on this, ranking 38th, and I think if you compare this to some of the other countries in the region, like Hungary ranks 36th, Lithuania 42nd, Estonia 97th, so that really highlights that this is quite a remarkable achievement for Ukraine. And like the minister said, it's now time to capitalize on that potential and to drive changes in the way that the country is governed and in the way that the country is perceived in order to deliver on that potential. And one of the key challenges in achieving that, we think, is perceptions around how well the country is governed. So if you see, Ukraine specifically ranks, one of the lower ranking metrics on this is perceptions of ethical standards, low levels of corruption, perceptions of safety and security. And these are often seen as big hurdles in getting foreign investment, in getting people to travel to your country for tourism, etc. So improving on these perceptions of governance and what's making the headlines of global news is going to impact quite significantly whether investors want to invest in your country and whether people want to come and travel and live in your country as well. There is also an opportunity for Ukraine to highlight its culture and heritage that it has to offer. There's an opportunity to elevate tourism perceptions in Ukraine. While it's not a bad ranking that it gets and not a bad score, I think there's improving familiarity of what Ukraine has to offer in terms of its cultural heritage can really dramatically improve these perceptions that people have and bring significant benefits in terms of tourism contribution to the economy itself. The development of the Ukrainian Institute, for example, is the perfect platform, and initiatives like that are helping in developing the country's perceptions in this area. Leaders in sports is another strong ranking metric for Ukraine, where the country's heritage and sports legacy is really what people are aware of and understand, and I think leveraging that and using those sports platforms and sporting events as an opportunity to highlight Ukraine as a country in terms of its overall culture and heritage can be quite an effective way of building influence in this area. Now, overall influence, or how influential people around the world think that Ukraine is one of the highest ranking metrics for Ukraine, where it ranks 45th in the overall ranking. But if we look at how positive and how negative people think that this influence is, I think that tells a little bit of a different story. So the top ranking nations on perceptions of how positive or negative a country's influence is, we see that you have countries like Switzerland, Canada, New Zealand, Finland, Sweden. And these are all countries that have quite positive relations with most countries around the world. They seem to have a positive influence. But Ukraine, on the other hand, does seem to rank amongst the bottom few and very close to the bottom ranking on this. But I think what's interesting to note is the fact that the external view of Ukraine's net influence is deemed to be negative 4%. But the internal view suggests that it's 49% positive in its influence on the world. And this contrast and difference, while most respondents from their own country do rate themselves more positively on most metrics, the gap is less stark when it comes to countries that people have high familiarity with. And the gap that you see for Ukraine on this metric really highlights that this is either a reality check for Ukraine in understanding the influence that it has on the world, or there's a need for better external communication to bridge this gap and to bring the external view of Ukraine's net influence closer to what people within the country know and understand. Speaking of COVID-19, one of the most defining features of the past year, there is a very strong correlation between COVID-19 perceptions and reputation, but also between perceptions of COVID-19 handling and governance. So the countries that you see in the orange and purple blobs where you see, these are countries that have performed worse than what many would have expected them to perform, and that really puts their reputation under threat. Ukraine on the scale sort of falls very close to the line. It's, the perceptions of how it's handled COVID-19 is close to what people would have expected. And I think this is down to the fact that if, and we see this with several other countries in our index, that if a country hasn't made the headlines in its COVID handling, either in terms of very excellent performance or in terms of very bad performance, people have often defaulted to what they know or believe about the country and its handling of similar crises. And therefore, what you see in terms of Ukraine is not necessarily a remarkable performance, and it's in line with what other people would have expected. Now, what I'd like to leave you here with is a little example of how soft power can really amplify your successes. Now, if we compare these two nations, Vietnam and New Zealand, both of these nations have done a good job in handling COVID-19. New Zealand has a population of about 5 million people, has had about 26 reported deaths in terms of COVID-19. Vietnam, on the other hand, has a population of 96 million and has about 35 reported deaths. And I would argue that Vietnam has had potentially a harder task. It's one of the first hit nations. It's closer to China. It's not an island nation like New Zealand that's easily able to close its borders. But despite this, it's been able to control the spread of the virus, and in doing so, they've protected their economy. They're one of the few nations around the world that have had a positive GDP growth in 2020. And that's a story that not many people around the world are aware of. The two nations both done well in terms of COVID-19, but only one seems to be given appropriate credit for it. And that really is the power of soft power. It can amplify your successes and boost your international standing and perceptions in other areas. New Zealand, for example, has had a charismatic leader at its helm, and she's been out there, Jacinda Ardern, promoting New Zealand's successes and communicating that to the world. And that's an opportunity for nations like Vietnam and Ukraine to understand the importance of familiarity. Having high familiarity and having high visibility on the world stage means that all of your successes and what's happening within your country is communicated to the rest of the world, and you are able to capitalize on those positive changes and positive improvements that are happening in the country. It's hard to really get influence if people don't know who you are or what you do. And nation brands operate like any other brand, and the one that's able to get the highest share of voice is the one that's able to benefit from it. And on this final slide, I would just like to cover some of the things that Ukraine can do in order to improve its ranking on the Global Soft Power Index. I think the first thing that we've discussed again and again is building this awareness and familiarity, and an external communications campaign that targets some of the key markets and some of the important economies in the world can really help address this. The second thing is, improvements in the business landscape that have occurred in the last year, and continuing on these and making Ukraine an attractive business and investment destination can really go great lengths in positioning Ukraine as a business hub in the world. Tourism, again, there's an opportunity to leverage some of the key attributes where Ukraine already has its strengths, notably, perceptions of great place to visit, cultural, sporting legacy. All of those can be leveraged in communications campaigns when reaching out to global audiences to promote Ukraine tourism. One of the hurdles that we discussed was governance and institutions, so addressing some of the wavering trust that is there in institutions in Ukraine, and improving the transparency, fairness, and reliability. And once this is communicated to the world, I think that can have significant trickle-down effects in perceptions of Ukraine as a well-governed nation in all senses, not just business or one other area. Finally, bridging this gap between internal and external perceptions. And the first step in doing that is, using this Global Soft Power Index research, which is an extremely valuable database to be able to understand what people think of you around the world. And only then are you able to, address gaps that exist, educate internal audiences, better communicate externally, and and really be able to improve your soft power on the world stage. That's it from me, and I think we'll welcome any questions from you in the Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Parul, for this, an area of information. There is a lot to take in and a lot of data to interpret, obviously, so we're going to move on to sort of a conversation and feedback session to reflect on what you've just presented. But I just wanted to say that some of your findings, I think, echo what the Ukrainian Institute also has experienced through our own work of the past 2.5 years, particularly this statement on Ukraine not having sort of specific strengths or associations that are immediately associated with Ukraine and only Ukraine. And it became evident through our own research that we did of perceptions of Ukraine internationally across 7 countries that we completed last year, commissioned and completed last year, and that confirmed exactly that. So there is this huge field of opportunity for Ukraine to define its own unique selling proposition, define its cultural markers, and indeed across other pillars of soft power to better position itself in the world. And I'm pleased that culture and heritage was also mentioned as a potential for growth, because that's our bread and butter, what we do daily, and I think the COVID has disrupted these efforts greatly with less mobility and less opportunity to exchange information and culture across borders. But I think there is definitely a huge field of opportunity there. So thank you, Parul, again, and I'm just going to move on to our great discussants today with a question to Kateryna about the previous soft power research projects and pieces and commissions that the New Europe Center in particular has done over the past years. I know that there was a study in 2011 about Ukraine's soft power potential, and also just last year you released, the center released a new study on that. How does those findings correlate with what we've just heard, and are there any points that the 2 or the 3 research pieces share between them?
Thank you very much, Volodymyr, and greetings to all the speakers and audience. Indeed, I represent the New Europe Center here today, which is a Ukrainian think tank, and we engaged with the issue of soft power back in 2011 for the first time with our modest efforts to measure it and evaluate and come up with some recommendations. I would like to congratulate Brand Finance with this amazing index, which I would like especially to compliment on, all the insights. This was an amazingly insightful presentation, but also for the very clear, transparent, and at the same time sophisticated methodology. This is an uneasy thing to do as a researcher. I know it very well. How you combine all these, hybrid and intangible things like soft power. So I think this is a tremendous example of how such indexes should be done. What we did is, I would say, complementary to your efforts. We researched Ukraine's soft power in the region, so not globally, not in the, let's say, the whole of Europe, but we concentrated on the region back in 2011 and then in updated version in 2020. And the countries where we tried to measure Ukraine's soft power with both quantitative and qualitative methods were Moldova, Georgia, Belarus, Russia, and Kazakhstan. And back in 2011, we also had Poland. And what we also did, we sometimes commission also surveys of Ukraine's perceptions abroad. And also last year, we released the results of such a survey, which were conducted in 4 countries of Western Europe, so France, Germany, Italy, and 1 country in Eastern Europe, Poland. I will base my very short remarks on the findings from these two projects, these 2 works. In the first place, I would like to say that the presentation of Brand Finance proves that indeed soft power, reputation, values, all it comprises can be spread on bread. This is an idiom coined by Ukraine's historian Yaroslav Gritsak, that values can be spread on bread, meaning values can be converted into monetary things, into bread and butter. And I think your presentation, Steve and Parul, also showed it well in terms of the foreign direct investment converted into soft power ranking converted into straightforwardly percentage of foreign direct investment. This is an amazing proof. Another point about this amazing discrepancy between Ukraine's self-perception and external perception, you made two hypotheses that either Ukraine has to kind of balance its self-perception with the reality, or it has communicated itself better. I would say this is the latter. I probably belong to this plus 49% of positive perception, because before this presentation we brainstormed about specific instances of Ukraine's soft power in recent years, and I would say there are plenty, but probably they are really miscommunicated or non-communicated at all, and the very different instances belong to various things, from reforms to culture and culinary things and pop products, business, and so on. Now, regarding Ukraine's strength, we discussed whether Ukraine does or does not have specific strength. I would argue that this belongs on where the perceptor is. And if we point to these regional studies, then I would definitely argue that Ukraine has soft power strength, because for some countries in the region, a democratic change is already an asset in itself, where the power can be can be changed in a democratic way through free and fair elections, where a person from a non-systematic politics, like Ukraine's current president Volodymyr Zelensky, can actually enter politics. This is, for some countries in the region who pursue democratic changes, is an asset in itself. Also, other instances of where Ukraine is a trendsetter, or let's say maybe in modern social network language, influencer in the region, is the conflict settlement, not a result yet, but the conflict settlement efforts. For example, in Moldova, they say, we wish we had this kind of persistence in combating in all ways for our land and sovereignty. Products and culture, like popular TV shows and confectionery things like Roshen in Ukraine, this is a brand which is maybe somehow perceived in a politicized way, but in Kazakhstan or in Georgia, this is a very popular brand. So I would say that Ukraine definitely has strength in the region at least, and maybe this is something which can be also promoted further abroad, or these are some lessons learned for Ukraine on how to promote itself beyond in the world. Another thing which I would like to mention, what hampers Ukraine's self-promotion efforts. In the survey regarding Ukraine's perception in those Western and Eastern European countries, so France, Germany, Italy, and Poland, which was done just last year, the top association with Ukraine is the war. And this is something which Ukraine, okay, corruption, yes, it's Ukraine's own responsibility, but the war, not so much. Yes, so this is Russian aggression, which Ukraine handles according to its hard and soft power, I would say, rather well. This is something which hampers Ukraine's self-promotion efforts very much, and which is also much ahead of any other poor or negative associations which we used to think were associated with Ukraine, like Chernobyl. So Chernobyl is not in top 10 anymore, but the war is. And also poverty and migrants, this can be, well, poverty is obviously maybe a negative association, but migrants can be both positive and negative. I would like to conclude my remarks right now with an observation about the regime in the soft power index. Stephen Parul mentioned that but dedicated a lot of attention to China and Russia perception, and it answered some of my questions about how regime translates into soft power. And I can say that in Ukraine's case, in the region, Ukraine is perceived as a, well, democracy let's say, trial story. So the region is still, the jury is still out whether Ukraine can actually handle its democracy, save its democracy, and if it can, then a success story and a trend and a model for the whole region. And if it can't, then, well, that's probably bad news for everyone. In case of China and Russia, okay, we now got really deeply in the methodology, and we understand that the reputation and the governance is only part of the methodology, and there are a lot of other things which account for really high positions of China and Russia. But those who would not maybe read into the methodology so much as we do, they would just think, okay, so you can be an autocracy and you can still be very powerful and popular. And this is, I think, really bad news for the world. Sorry for this bad note for ending. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kateryna. I think we'll also come back to that question, because there was a question from the audience about how authoritarian governance, is, I don't know how to say, well, hides behind this great facade that countries can construct through their soft power instruments. It's definitely a very interesting thing to explore regarding my earlier remarks about manipulative nature of some of the soft power efforts the countries employ to achieve their strategies. Alina, over to you now. I have a question to you about this this statement that featured strongly in Steve and Parul's presentations about, you can do so much at home. You can do your homework properly. You can be a good, well-governed country. You can be very efficient in, dealing with a pandemic. You can be prosperous, But if no one knows about it, then that isn't going to take you anywhere. From a communications perspective, what can strategic communications of a country do to address this? From your professional background, from your experience, can you tell us a little bit more what actually StratCom is and how it helped Ukraine make some of its achievements more and better visible internationally, probably with a few cases, if you can? Thank you.
Yes, sure. Hello, everyone, and I'm glad to welcome everybody who is online now and watching us. So if we're talking about strategic communications, this is became a very fashionable word, and everybody's talking about it now. But actually, everything is simple. You need to have a strategy, and you need to have a capacity to implement it. So the same with communications. Communications seems to be very, let's say, something like a cloud. Yeah, so you cannot touch it, you cannot see it. And that's why everybody considers that they are good in this and they are professionals in this and they can do it easily. But this is also a profession, this is also skills. And I think that taken seriously, that's what we lack for now in communications in Ukraine. I think that it's very true that till now we cannot identify our strengths and translate them right. So the absence of identification, this is the absence of the strategy, and the non-ability to translate them right, this is absence of some kind of structure, investments in it, and approach. At the same time, I should tell you that at least we move forward to understanding that this is an important part of the work of the government. Because before, no any government, no MFA, no one took it seriously and didn't take it as a part of the professional work. So I think that we're going better with this, and the attempt of the state to establish some kind of umbrella brand in Ukraine now, which I consider is quite successful from the point of view that it was a project which gave the platform and created some kind of framework for businesses, arts, culture, to deal within this a framework and to deliver at least common visibility and common slogans and given some sense of what's going on in Ukraine now. So that was a good example, and I think that we will find many other small examples, but we need more persistent approach to say that we're doing strategic communications. For now on, this is more ad hoc and more, on my opinion, Ukraine is now more successful on using the, let's say, negative cases, transferring them into positive than on promoting some kind of positive stories itself. Because usually we start to communicate intensively only if some crisis is on the floor. So we start to approach it with all our passion and skills, and it works. But when there is no crisis, we are more focused on something else. And as soon as we're talking about the like a soft power, this is, as we said, not only governmental approach. This is the possibility of non-governmental actors to give their input into all this. And we have some few cases, like a good cases, which can bring Ukraine on top discussions. For the last period, it's like a campaign which we as an agency were proud to make together with MFA Kyiv, not Kyiv, when this was like a very small campaign initiated just to rise up the question about right grammar in the city. And this is just right grammar, which actually describes transfer from post-Soviet to independency. And it became like a quite viral. It became like a self-sustainable story. And if in the beginning we wanted to target just 8 media, like leading media in the world to make them change, and few leading airports to make them change, actually we covered most of media and most of airports, and till now we see these changes which are going on. And this is a very good example. Another good example, like which was not probably fully initiated by Ukraine, but very obviously used, it was like a Championship League final in 2018, which took place in Kyiv, when we have a lot of British fans here, who were, most of them were amazed with the like work of police, food, beverages, and welcoming force of all Ukrainians. And there were multiple stories on the Facebook and other networks promoting tourism to Ukraine. And by the way, coming back to Chernobyl, maybe this is not the negative topic, but now this is positive topic for Ukraine. I mean that after this movie, which we had last year, we had plus 30,000 tourists into Chernobyl. So if we're talking about the money and coming to the, that's a good story how to even the difficult part of your story or your history bring to the positive point. Of course, we can say about the efforts, for example, of Ukrainian project, which is now like promoting their movies, like short stories about Ukraine in Poland, in Czech Republic, in Bulgaria, where they place it in public transport, in sports club, and those close to our countries, which probably has one kind of specific historical relations and some historical problems. They see some kind of promotion which Ukraine can get. And IT industry, this is probably where the Ukraine itself is not very obvious as a state, but obviously the whole state knows that Ukraine is doing well in this, because we have this PetCube example, grammar, deposit photos, or reface applications which were created in Ukraine and which like bring attention to Ukrainian industry of IT. Just like a few reflections on everything which was said before to add that soft to hard power, this is just the projection of your core essence or your values and your strengths. And for us, the issue is about to agree among ourselves about what is our strengths, and probably to has less discussions and more actions in this regard, because I think that this like a discrepancy in perception inside Ukraine and outside Ukraine shows directly what's going on. We are too focused on our internal discourse. We need to be more focused on international discourse, on our advantages towards the world, because we compete here not with our past, we compete here with other countries who are like a move forward into the future, and we need to focus on our future and what we can deliver to the global future, and then the like a communication would be much easier and it will perform its role well.
Thank you, thank you, Alina, for this remark, which I find also very productive. We shouldn't be complacent about what we think the world will be interested in with regard to Ukraine, because in our work we also find this discrepancy quite staggering about people think of Ukraine's assets in culture, in media, in education, in science, to be the most powerful and to be the most potent for international promotion, but actually it's not, and it's something else entirely that Ukraine should be communicating externally, acknowledging that there is this gap, and it's okay to have it, I think. You mentioned some of the sort of institutional change that Ukraine has experienced over the past several years in terms of its country brand, Ukraine Now, introduced several years ago, inspired by the hugely successful GREAT campaign. Also, the public diplomacy strategy that the minister mentioned, which will be launched in just a few days. We, as the Ukrainian Institute, launched our cultural diplomacy strategy last year. And just a few days ago, there was an announcement of the creation of a center for countering disinformation in Ukraine. So certainly there is this institutional framework building up to strengthen Ukraine's soft power in the world. However, I wanted to sort of raise a question to you about: is there a one voice policy that Ukraine projects internationally? Because there are too many actors in the country that influence Ukraine's soft power standing. Are they really talking to each other? Are they really having this common ground? Are they really, devising something that indeed can be condensed into very simple but efficient messaging internationally? From your experience of government relations, working closely with different government departments, is that the case? Do you think there is room for improvement? Definitely there is, but has there been improvement sort of year on year on that front?
Well, my answer is not. I don't see the one voice, some kind of communication. I'm not the very supporter of one voice, let's say. So yeah, I think that it should be multiple voices, but saying the same narratives, let's say so. But the issue again, I do believe that the biggest problem of us is absence of enough institutions and processes inside. So this is not very sexy scene, which you will be very fond of, like to build up the processes. But if there are processes in place, so that in different ministries and agencies, people know what to say, how to say, and where they can get this information, they will do it in most cases. If there is some kind of vacuum, then arises a different opinions on different topics, which of course from the point of view of more established democracies looks very strange, because they don't understand what the problem is. So, and I think that Ukraine passes through this building up of institutions, and we are in modern world where the complete conditions changed from the point of view of informational society, information warfare, which we're facing, and it's influenced very much on the and this is also soft power, actually, the war itself. So we need to develop and establish the absolutely different type of regulations or processes which should be established. And we have this unique opportunity because we didn't have old one. I mean that we can build it from the scratch and to build very modern approach, which maybe the older democracy has like a challenge, because they need to reshuffle everything, which is much harder. So I think that we have place for improvement for sure. We saw these different pieces of the attempts which were successful, which can just like be not very sustainable now, but they still gives more and more on the on the ground of this, that we need to continue this work and we need to have these common efforts of all the governmental and non-governmental actors toward the building the institutions. And I think that the Ukrainian Institute is one of the best examples. This was like some kind of a dream which half of the people who take part in the establishment didn't believe to, but we did it, and you exist, and you did a lot of work, and I believe you will do a lot of work like with this soft power and also which will influence on our index here.
Thank you so much, Alina. This was an unprompted compliment, by the way, so but thank you for this. Thank you for your kind words. Coming back to Kateryna's point about regional leadership, I mean, Ukraine's sixth position in the global soft power index, 61 among 100 nations, obviously doesn't place us in the top, but should we be at the top given, you know, the circumstances, the capacity, all the different factors that influence Ukraine's soft power ranking? And I find that idea of yours of a regional sort of leadership or a regional example or a regional community of nations, Ukraine can be featured more prominently and quite productive. And sort of feeding on from Alina's point about participation of governmental and non-governmental actors, I think we forget that soft power isn't a prerogative of the government only. I think probably a majority of those markers and those factors sit with the non-governmental sector, with the private sector, or with the civil society. So combining those sort of thoughts into one, what do you think are the strengths of Ukrainian civil society that can feature us better or more strongly in our region? In the company of countries that we can be more directly compared to or related to.
Thank you, Volodymyr. Well, to begin with, the idea of this regional leadership, just to be sure, I attribute it to the New Europe Center and its director Dona Gismanchuk, so not just my idea, so the think tank. I think overall, when we speak about this place, Ukraine's rank in the index, thank you for bringing this up because this is also one of my points. I think it's an issue of both ambitions and methodology. In terms of ambitions, yes, I mean, they say pose yourself a goal and grow into it. Your goal should be bigger than you at the moment. Yes, otherwise that's not a goal. So I think it would be good if Ukraine at least changed a dozen, in absolute terms. Let's say as a goal for the next year. We also can see that the countries which rank in top 10 are, I think all of them are global powers. Ukraine is not a global power yet, so probably Ukraine cannot be in top 10 in short term, but who knows where we will get in 10 years. So setting ourselves bigger goals, yes, definitely. Another point is these changes in Ukraine, which happen, I would say, very, very fast over the last, maybe especially 7-8 years after 2014. When we speak about our brands, I would assume that my Ukrainian colleagues would agree that there have been so many new things which appeared over the course of the last, well, let's say 10 years. Also in those niches which we consider specifically very Ukrainian. Let's take cuisine, probably the most popular food chefs, food bloggers, which become opinion leaders, which promote Ukraine's cuisine also to UNESCO heritage, they appeared in the last 5 years. So back 5 years ago, we didn't know about them, and I would say not all Ukrainians know of them yet. So there are rapid changes in Ukraine, which just trail behind of the communication efforts. And they not only trail behind our own efforts to tell about them, but they also are hindered by this reputation legacy, which comes not maybe from the Soviet times, but from the 90s, when Ukraine was indeed poor, corrupt, institutionally weaker than now, and these were the first impressions which the foreigners got when they came to Ukraine. So we have to counter both keep up with the changes which take place in Ukraine, and counter that legacy, let's say, of the 90s or early 2000. Speaking about Ukraine's regional powers and regional strength, as I mentioned, indeed they are many, and I would say that the key Ukraine's effort right now would be to communicate even more and even better. And personally, I do believe in vertical communication, institutional communication between what Ukraine's civil society does. Reminds me of many campaigns which I either observed and or was a participant of, starting from the Revolution of Dignity to the campaign for yes vote in the Netherlands referendum, let's say, in the association agreement. You may remember that. And I would say that as a participant, I can say that sometimes horizontal efforts work and sometimes they don't, when there is no coordination center and the efforts overlap and sometimes run even counter to each other. So I do believe in the institutional necessity of a developed, well-designed and well-funded program which would encompass all institutions, because no one Ukrainian institute, no one NGO, or even a combinations of NGOs in Ukrainian civil society is indeed strong, but strong as a very wide and discoordinated community. I believe that this is a good case to tell, but it's not enough as a strategy.
Thank you for this, Kateryna. I think it, both Alina and you quite strongly sort of voted for institutional capacity that is much needed for any country's strong standing in relation to its soft power. And I think this is something that the results of the index also tell us, because all the countries who rank higher in the index have these strong institutional infrastructure and a very clear agenda and a very clear strategy that they're pursuing. And I think that is one of the things that helps them get to the top. Stephen Parul, we have just a few minutes left. We ran over time. Do you have any remarks or very brief, sort of 1-minute comments on the discussants' feedback to your presentations? If yes, please go ahead.
Sure. Well, I'll start. I mean, just this point about the presence of countries like China, not model democracies perhaps, that are still scoring high in terms of soft power. I think that is the reality, and it's not an endorsement from us or any of the respondents that says this is how countries should be run, but it's a reality that soft power is not just about good reputation. I think the brutal truth is that if a country does many things well, then it can be attractive, even if there are some elements that we might disagree with in terms of how it treats its people. And I think there are really plenty of examples of that. And then the second thing is really just a reminder that when the imperative, I guess, for to try and improve, it's really something that all parts of society can contribute. So it's not just, okay, the government must do this, the government must do that. It's also about what can other stakeholders in Ukraine do to help improve. Private corporations, private citizens, NGOs, and other bodies. Everybody can help. And I think perhaps the more that the country is united in tackling the reputational challenges it may have and the challenges to improve its familiarity and presence on the world stage, I think the more you can work together, I'm sure you'll benefit. Parul, anything to add?
Yeah, I think the final point that I'd just like to add is, something that both Kateryna and Alina have mentioned, is the need for this collective action and a coordinated response across all of the different agencies, and having a uniform strategy, so you're not sending out mixed signals, so you have a uniform understanding of what is needed to promote an appropriate image of the country on the world stage. And like Steve mentioned, it's not just government organizations, it's all of the ways that people around the world interact with your country, whether that's through, your cuisine, the airline that, when people board it, that presents an image of the country to the world. And it's, using all of those different ways and presenting a cohesive image on the world stage.
Thank you so much. We are out of time, unfortunately. This has been a really interesting discussion that I think we could, go on and on for ages, just digging deep into that huge set of data that you've managed to accumulate. And thank you indeed, Steve and Parul, for the amazing index. And I know I can only imagine how much effort was put into it. So thanks a lot for that data, which we'll definitely take on board and try to take away sort of the main findings, the main outcomes, and incorporate some of them into our work. And also thank you to Kateryna and Alina for your reflections and for your contributions, and for some of your recommendations as well. I would also like to remind the audience that this is this was a one presentation in a series of other events that the Ukrainian Institute and partners are doing to discuss cultural diplomacy, soft power, and research, and importance of research and analytics for this kind of work. And just this coming Wednesday, here at the Ukraine Crisis Media Center, we're going to have a series of presentations of Ukraine's perceptions internationally in Turkey, Japan, and the US that the Ukrainian Institute commissioned last year. So we're going to have 4 different discussion panels and presentations to briefly present the outcomes and then sort of discuss the findings with experts. So you're most welcome to join the live streams on Wednesday. Please do check the Ukrainian Institute's Facebook page for more details. Thank you again to all the speakers, all the presenters, and to the audience for staying with us, and see you very soon. Thank you.